Hey everybody, welcome back to Framework Films. Today I'm actually going to walk you through the process on how I render time lapses using LRTimelapse. So let's go ahead and jump right in. You can see here I have my Lightroom screen open, and we're going to be rendering this time lapse that I took in the Marriott Marquis down in Atlanta. The main piece of this tutorial will be the workflow in LRTimelapse, how I pass those XMP files back and forth between Lightroom and LRTimelapse, and keeping my files in Lightroom the whole time. There's no taking them out and putting them in a very specific catalog specifically for LRTimelapse. Everything just kind of stays in the place that they are, and you pass these XMP files back and forth. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I will first start by opening LRTimelapse. All right, and let's go ahead and find where these files live on my computer. And we're going to be working on my set 12.7 time-lapse Marriott Marquis. And what LRTimelapse does immediately is it'll start loading the EXIF data, that sidecar XMP information, and it'll generate what's known as an exposure curve, which is this blue line that's generating right here. Right, and we see, because we're inside, the general exposure of this 400 frame time lapse stays pretty consistent. Right, maybe a little dip in light, maybe some of the windows, the sun got blocked by a couple of clouds or something like that. So overall, we get this immediate preview of what this time lapse looks like, uncolored as is. Pretty clean preview. And something that you'll notice too is I actually have the folder where all these files live open, just so we can kind of acknowledge what changes in that folder as time goes on, as we edit through some of the photos. So immediately when that exposure curve generated, we get this .lrt file folder, and it has the previews. This is kind of where the metadata of that time lapse lives, specifically generated from LRTimelapse, so that I can return to this time lapse in the program to really quickly reload and regenerate the information. So the exposure curve, for example, wouldn't have to reload, and other edits from that point. So LRTimelapse, you want to set your keyframes based on changing light. LRTimelapse, it stands for light ramping time-lapse, right? So we can see that there's a little bit of a light ramp here. Again, this is an interior shot, so it's all pretty stable, pretty consistent lighting. But you know, I still want to open up my keyframes wizard, and I'm going to have a keyframe minimum 2, right? So I'll start having a keyframe at the beginning, and I'll scrub all the way to the end of the sequence and throw a keyframe at the end. I do that with this little toggle button here, right? You see the blue dot. So blue dot on, blue dot off, keyframe on, keyframe off. So now I have a keyframe here on this yellow line at frame 0, the first frame, and keyframe 399 here at the very end, right? But you know, the light kind of ramps a little bit in the middle here, so maybe because this is a changing, like the light in the environment changed, I'll actually throw a keyframe on that one too, so that's at 121. Now I'll save, and what saving does is it takes that keyframe information and it saves it into the XMP sidecar file of these specific frames, which means that once we click save, we can actually go back to our folder that we saw before, and now we see that there's been an XMP file generated for every single photo, for every single image in this sequence, right? And what Lightroom will do with that is it'll acknowledge which images were the keyframes, or LRTimelapse saves that information to that XMP file. So what we'll do here is I'll click on the G key, return to grid mode, Control A, Command A if you're on a Mac, right? I'm highlighting every single frame in the sequence, and I'll go up to Metadata and read metadata from files. And it's going to read those XMP sidecars that were generated by LRTimelapse. So I'll read metadata from files, and we have to wait for it to load. I'll probably cut through this in post. Now that Lightroom has finished reading those XMP files, what I'm going to do is come down here and filter specifically to LRT keyframes, LRT5 keyframes. So we're going to click it, and here we have our 5 frames that we've selected in LRTimelapse. And you actually see, like, the light does change between them. And if we rendered that as is without acknowledging that change in light, it would render with flicker. And LRTimelapse is a tool that helps cut down on flicker. You don't want flicker in time lapses because it looks a little amateur. You know, there are better ways to accommodate flicker than just letting it exist. So what we're going to do is we're going to sit through and edit these images. I'll speed through this just so you kind of see the settings that I'm applying. A quick note about the texture and dehaze sliders when you're working with LRTimelapse is if you ramp those sliders up too much, you'll actually introduce, like, it almost feels like a white balance flicker, because across each frame the texture and dehaze render slightly different colors. So I typically avoid using texture and dehaze. Maybe I'll use like between values 2 and 5 just to kind of add in a little extra sauce. In this lapse I'm going to leave it completely out because you do risk messing with a white balance looking flicker in your time lapse when you mess with those sliders. So this is my first edited frame for the sequence, and what I'll do is I'll copy and paste the edit and apply it to the 2 other frames, keeping in mind that my middle frame is slightly darker, so I'm going to raise the exposure just a little bit to match frames 1 and keyframe 3. So I can just go right click, develop settings. I was like, where is that for a second? Copy settings, and I'll do check all and copy. I'll go to frame 3 because I know the exposure matches perfectly. And I will go to develop settings, and I'll do paste settings. Boom, that pastes the rotation, it pastes all the coloring, pastes everything. And I'll go over to the middle frame and do the exact same thing. So develop settings, paste settings. And as I flicker back and forth between 1 and 2, I'll notice that frame 2 is still just a little bit darker, right? So I'll just bump up my exposure ever so slightly. You know, I'm at 1.04, maybe I'll put it to 1.13. So I think that's about as close as we're going to get it, and LRTimelapse is going to help us get it even closer. So let's go ahead and return to grid view by clicking G, and we'll highlight all 3 of those frames. I clicked on the first frame, I hit Shift, I held it down, I clicked on the last frame. I'm going to go up to Metadata and save metadata to files, right? And so now for these 3 frames, we're actually going to see that the metadata for those 3 frames were updated, right? I mean, you could go in the properties, you can look at the creation and updated date and all that. I won't, but keep in mind that these XMP files contain all of your edits to those photos. So now that we have saved the new metadata, this new color information, to those XMP files using metadata save to files, I'm going to return to LRTimelapse, and I'm going to click reload. And it finished reading, so I'll click auto transition. And now we see the keyframes, they were lifted up, and the auto transition data has all been calculated. So now we'll click on visual previews, which is going to re-render the exposure curve, and it'll allow us to preview this time lapse with the colors that we just chose. And this part takes a little bit of time, so we'll fast forward through it. All right, that ding means that it's finished rendering the visual preview. So I'll go ahead and click play, and we'll see what this looks like colored, but we have not yet done our visual deflicker yet. Hey everyone, I just want to take a second to say, if you're liking the video so far, feel free to drop a comment below. Ask me any questions you have, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for subscription notifications. I will be continuing to make content related to time-lapse and drone videos. So I'd love to have you guys here, and thanks a lot for watching.